Welcome to LangTime Studio Recap. I am going to catch you up on various aspects of the show, and today I'm going to be talking about the game that we are working on. So to give you some background, this is me right in the middle there with my friend Blaine on the right, with the blonde hair and without the glasses. And he's been my best friend going back to first grade, which would have been 1987. There we are in high school, and that's us when I was at college. Anyway, together we would do lots of stuff. But one of the things that we did was played video games, and in particular, I had the Nintendo series, so I had an NES and then a Super Nintendo. Blaine had a Sega Genesis and a TurboGrafx. So whenever we were over at his place, we'd play Sega games and TurboGrafx, and at my place, we'd play Nintendo. One of the games that was both of our favorites was a game called Shining Force. There was Shining Force, this one, and then Shining Force 2. There was another one before this, but that's in the same series, but it was a different style of game. It was more like Might and Magic, if you ever played those early games where it was a first-person perspective and you were kind of like going through a maze and fighting things. It wasn't, I don't know. That wasn't as interesting to me as this. So Shining Force is an amazing game that if you play modern video games, I guess would be closest to Fire Emblem. I haven't really played Fire Emblem very much. I don't know. It just doesn't strike me as interesting. How do you say that? It doesn't strike me as interesting as Shining Force. That's weird. As. I don't think you can say that. Anyway, but you know what I meant, right? Because you can't say it doesn't strike me as interesting, because it does strike me as interesting. It just doesn't strike me as interesting as Shining Force. Anyway, so the point of this, Shining Force is it's not a real-time strategy-based game. It's a turn-based strategy game. What happens is that you're a bunch of different characters. You control an army. You go against another army, and each of you has a kind of like a speed level, and that determines who goes when. So to give you an example, this is kind of like what the gameplay is like. So this is just the very first battle, and you have a couple of different characters here, and you're fighting the armies of Runefast because they're, of course, it's a video game, so what are they going to do when it comes to coming up with names? They're just going to do the most garbage job possible. Runefast, get out of here with that. Anyway, so right now, see what's happening. That's my character there. Or one of them. She was the one that goes first. That's like your hero, and you can see like he has his own name, his own stats, his own weapons. All of the characters are slightly different. They so it's not like you just have soldier types. They're like all individual characters, which is one of the things that I thought was so cool about Shining Force. It wasn't like like you have I don't know, ranged soldier 1, 2, 3, 4, and they all have the same stats and same abilities, and then you have a different soldier type. That would be something like Heroes of Might and Magic, if you ever played that one, where you just have troop types. This one, it's like all individual things. For example, there are, you don't see him here, but like the guy that's named Luke for some reason, what a terrible name. He's basically the same type of guy as another guy that you get called, what is it, Dort? Anyway, we're going to see combat here. This is Ken. He's a ranged guy, because the centaurs are all these kind of warriors that throw spears. Anyway, so it's basically, as you see, it's like you take one action per turn. Here is the wizard, and she is going to blaze this guy here. And of course, yeah, so there's MP and everything in this. So it's like, but as you can see, it just it cycles back and forth between, so it's not like, what's the game I'm thinking of? It's not like chess, where chess you have your two sides, right? And then you have two players, and you always swap turns, right? And then each player gets to decide whatever piece they want to move. Cons, you always miss. You always miss. I lined it up for you, and you always miss. Anyway, so it's not like that. Instead, it's just whoever's speed comes up next. So you could see that the enemy just went twice in a row there. They didn't do anything because it's the first battle and they're trying to take it easy on you. But it's like the enemy can go 3 times in a row, 4 times in a row. You can go 3 or 4 times in a row, but you also don't get to choose who goes. It's all determined based on speed. which is something that you can easily pull off in a computer game, right? But it's not something that is easily done in a board game. But what I was thinking was, what if you could? And so basically, that was the premise for the idea for a board game that I had. Because it's like, playing something like this, it's fun, but it's one player. There's no two-player version of this. And it's also like you can't just pull it off the shelf at any point in time. You need a screen, you need all these things like that. But if you had it as a board game, you could sit down with one or more people and actually play a game. And not only that, the way that I was thinking of it is you could have any number of people play, basically as many as you had pieces, because you could have one person take control of one piece, and that was just the game. So it's like if you had 10v10, you could have 20 people playing. You could also have 2 people playing, or you could have any number of people playing. And not only that, let's say that you had 40 total characters, right? You could just have like 4 different people draft 4 different armies of 5 or 6 or something like that, and then have a huge like 1 versus 1 versus 1 versus 1 battle if you wanted to. You could also do team battles. Anyway, so that was the idea. Was basically, how can I make Shining Force into a board game? There had been a couple of others I'd seen that did something somewhat similar. I was inspired initially by Hero Quest, but that's more of an RPG style game. Gloomhaven is like a successor to Hero Quest. There is one called Crossmasters, but it's kind of lame. Basically, you just add up all the speed attributes of all of your various characters, and then whichever player has the highest speed, they get to go first. And I think you just like move your entire, like one player moves their entire army, then one player moves their entire army. That's lame. Anyway, so this is what I wanted. I wanted basically the style of Shining Force as a board game. And then when it came to a theme, I've always liked not like super cutesy, but cute tending animals. I just think it's adorable. Think things like, Redwall, or even to a very different extent, Tailspin, Bucky O'Hare. And so I was like, okay, this is perfect. We can have anthropomorphic animals doing battle, Shining Force style. After going through a whole list of animals, I narrowed it down to 5. So it would be rabbits, opossums, mice, cats, and dogs. And believe me, it was tough settling on the opossum, but it did make the cut. Anyway, but I had that. So I had the 5 animal groups, and I started coming up with the way that the game would actually work. This spreadsheet is obviously going to be meaningless, but when I was working with my friends Ken and John to create a basketball board game, I inadvertently created, or I created a style of method, like a method of creating characters, because for that one we had basketball players, and I was like, okay, you could make them better or worse in a more or less principled way by having tiers, and so that's ultimately what I did with this. So I created, I want to say 10 different classes that were inspired by various either D&D or like World of Warcraft or fantasy tropes, and then 5 tiers so that you could separate them out, and then they were separated into 5 different kingdoms corresponding to the 5 different animals, with the classes kind of spread not evenly, a bit unevenly, but then in terms of tiers, an even spread there. And so and then I just gave them names, just, pulling stuff out from English or naming certain ones of them, but they were coming from different languages and things like that. These were the kingdoms, for example. What is this actually? Yeah, Kingdom A. So you can see that's actually the dog kingdom, and so you can see they have a lot of melee classes and healers, and then they have 2 healers, but they have no other magic classes. Whereas the cat kingdom, which is next, you can see they have like all the magic classes and very few melee classes. All of this is going to be based on dice. I set up the dice system here so that basically the higher the tier, the smaller the die. So a four-sided die is the best, and you have a 75% chance of getting something good, and then 25% chance of getting something neutral. So your best characters are always going to be at least neutral. And then as you go further down, the dice get bigger, and there's more of a chance that something negative will happen. Made a bunch of notes. Oh, and by the way, right, the whole point of introducing Blaine. Blaine and I were working on this game together. And so you can see here, there's differences in handwriting. The two on the right are my notes. The other ones are Blaine's notes, and I was working separately on here. Coming up with magic, because that's going to be a whole thing. And also, I forget what that one was, but basically I was figuring out balance. But you might notice, for those who are familiar with my languages, that I had actually slated some of my languages for the animal groups. In particular, Kamikawi was going to be for the rabbits, Giler was going to be for the cats, Njama was going to be for the mice, Gwader was going to be for the dogs, and Sedan was going to be for the opossums. The first thing that I did, though, because as I was coming up with the lore of this thing, I was really getting stuck with coming up with names, because I wanted to have, languages to pull from to make the names. But the first group that I worked with was the rabbits. And of course, what I noticed is that these rabbits are supposed to be forest dwellers, river rabbits, nowhere near the ocean. And the Kamikawi language, of course, has this entire backstory for the people that spoke it, living on islands and living off of the ocean. It just didn't make sense that to use the Kamikawi language for these forest-dwelling rabbits. And so what that meant was I was going to need new languages, brand new languages, which meant that I was going to have to create brand new languages. So I was constantly getting stuck saying, I can't do more work on this until I have the languages. Separately, I started working on a show called Motherland Fort Salem. And when I signed up for this show, I was very busy, and I also wanted to try to get work for other conlangers, and so I thought this might be the perfect opportunity. I cleared it with them, and they okayed me hiring an assistant for this show. And after a search, I chose Jessie Sams as my assistant. There she is. Anyway, so Jessie and I worked together on Motherland Fort Salem, and we worked so well together that I really wanted us to have another project to work on. And I didn't know what that would be. But then at the same time, I was getting stuck with the game, realized that I wanted languages, that I had to create a bunch of languages, and that I didn't, have time to just do that. And so I thought, what if Jessie and I worked together to create these languages, and to make it more job-like, what if we created a YouTube series where we did it live? Because I had been recording myself working on various shows and things, and that was cool, but I would have to put up all of my work well after the fact. Basically, none of the videos could go up until the show had aired, and because otherwise it would violate NDA. If we were working on our own thing, then the NDA wouldn't matter. And that is how LangTime Studio was born. It was kind of an excuse for Jessie and I to work together. It was also a way to take care of the languages for this board game that I was making. And it was a way to bring live conlanging to YouTube, since there was no way that we were going to be able to do it with our stuff that was covered by an NDA. Because believe me, that would be super cool. It would be super cool, like for Dune, for example. And I did do some videos on my work on Dune. But to just say, we're making a brand new language, everybody tune in, you can see how it goes. But that would be really cool. It's obviously impossible. So this is the next best thing. And that's basically how LangTime Studio was born.